12-year-old brings baby brother to hospital. What she whispers next will shock you. The small town of Havenwood, Kentucky, was a place of faded glory, where the once thriving coal mines had long since closed, leaving behind a legacy of economic hardship and a lingering sense of despair. The houses were small and weathered, the yards overgrown, and the streets lined with shuttered businesses. It was a place where secrets were easily kept, where whispers in the dark could carry more weight than shouts in the daylight. 12-year-old Emily Carter lived in a cramped, two-bedroom trailer on the outskirts of Havenwood, a trailer that felt even smaller with the constant presence of her stepfather, Todd Harper. Emily's life had been marked by instability and a quiet, pervasive fear that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Her mother, Sarah, worked double shifts at the local diner, her face etched with a weariness that went beyond the physical demands of her job. Sarah had met Todd 3 years earlier, shortly after Emily's father had abandoned them, leaving them with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a broken heart. Todd had seemed like a savior at first, a strong, protective figure who offered stability and a promise of a better life. But the promise had quickly soured. Todd was a man of volatile moods, prone to sudden outbursts of anger, and a controlling nature that suffocated both Sarah and Emily. He was a heavy drinker, and his anger often escalated after he'd had a few too many beers. He was verbally abusive towards Sarah, constantly criticizing her, belittling her, and making her feel worthless. Emily, a quiet and observant child, witnessed these interactions with a growing sense of dread. She had learned to be silent, to be invisible, to avoid attracting Todd's attention. She had developed a keen awareness of his moods, learning to anticipate his anger, to navigate the minefield of his unpredictable temper. Her baby brother, Noah, just 10 months old, was the one bright spot in Emily's life. She adored him, showering him with the love and affection that she so rarely received herself. She would sing to him, play with him, and protect him from the harsh realities of their home life. But even Noah wasn't immune to Todd's anger. Emily had seen him yell at the baby, shake him when he cried, and handle him roughly, his large hands seemingly too clumsy and impatient for such a delicate creature. She had also seen the bruises, small, faint marks on Noah's arms and legs, bruises that Sarah dismissed as accidents, as the clumsy tumbles of a baby learning to crawl. But Emily knew better. She had seen the fear in her mother's eyes, the way she flinched when Todd raised his voice, the way she tried to shield Noah from his father's rage. She had heard the whispers in the dark, the muffled cries, the thuds and crashes that came from her mother's bedroom late at night. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she didn't know what to do. She was just a child, trapped in a world of adult secrets and unspoken fears. She longed to tell someone, to seek help, but she was terrified of the consequences, of what Todd might do if he found out. She carried the burden alone, a silent witness to the darkness that was slowly consuming her family. The whispers in the dark were growing louder, and Emily knew that soon, she would have to find the courage to speak, to break the silence, to save herself and her baby brother from the escalating danger that lurked within their home. Emily's life revolved around two things: school and caring for Noah. School was her refuge, a place where she could escape the tension and fear of her home life, where she could immerse herself in learning, and where she could, for a few hours, feel like a normal child. She was a bright student, earning good grades, but she was also withdrawn and socially awkward, struggling to connect with her peers. She had one close friend, a girl named Megan, who sensed that something was wrong but didn't press Emily for details, offering a quiet, non-judgmental presence. But it was Noah who truly consumed her thoughts and her energy. He was a sweet, cheerful baby, with bright blue eyes and a contagious giggle. He was her responsibility, her comfort, and her reason for enduring the daily struggles of her life. Sarah, overwhelmed by her own problems and increasingly dependent on Todd, had gradually relinquished much of Noah's care to Emily. She would leave for work early in the morning, often before Emily and Noah were even awake, and return late at night, exhausted and emotionally drained. Emily would wake up early, change Noah's diaper, feed him, and get him ready for the day. She would then prepare her own breakfast, pack her lunch, and walk to school, leaving Noah in the care of a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who lived in a nearby trailer. Mrs. Henderson was kind and compassionate, but she was also frail and hard of hearing, and Emily worried about leaving Noah with her. She would rush home from school each afternoon, eager to see her brother, to make sure he was safe and well cared for. She would spend the evenings feeding Noah, bathing him, playing with him, and putting him to bed. She would sing him lullabies, tell him stories, and whisper promises of a better future, a future where they would be safe, happy, and free from fear. She was, in many ways, Noah's mother, taking on responsibilities far beyond her years, sacrificing her own childhood to care for her baby brother. She did it out of love, out of a fierce protectiveness, and out of a growing fear of what might happen to him if she didn't. She noticed the small bruises on Noah's body, the way he sometimes flinched when she touched him, the way he would cry inconsolably for no apparent reason. She tried to tell her mother, to express her concerns, but Sarah would dismiss her fears, attributing the bruises to accidents, the flinching to sensitivity, and the crying to colic. Emily knew, deep down, that her mother was in denial, that she was refusing to see the truth, that she was choosing to believe Todd's lies rather than face the horrific reality of his actions. But Emily also understood her mother's fear, her helplessness, her dependence on Todd. She felt trapped, caught between her love for her brother, her fear of her stepfather, and her loyalty to her mother. She had no one to turn to, no one to trust, no one who could help her navigate this impossible situation. She started to keep a secret journal, hidden beneath her mattress, where she would write down her fears, her observations, and her desperate pleas for help. She would describe the bruises, the whispers, the escalating tension in the house. She would pour out her heart, her soul, onto the pages, creating a silent record of the abuse she witnessed and the fear she endured. The journal became her confidant, her only outlet, her only source of solace in a world that was growing increasingly dark and dangerous. It was a testament to her resilience, her courage, and her unwavering determination to protect her baby brother, no matter the cost. Emily's burden was heavy, but she carried it with a quiet strength that belied her young age, a strength born out of love, fear, and a desperate hope for a better future. The night that changed everything began like any other. Sarah was working a late shift at the diner, leaving Emily in charge of Noah. Todd was home, which was unusual. He typically spent his evenings at the local bar, returning late, drunk and often belligerent. Emily had fed Noah, bathed him, and put him to bed in his small crib, which was tucked into a corner of her own cramped bedroom. She was trying to finish her homework, but her mind kept wandering, filled with a growing sense of unease. Todd had been unusually quiet all evening, sitting in the living room, watching television, and drinking beer. He hadn't spoken to Emily, hadn't even acknowledged her presence, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. As the evening wore on, Todd's behavior became more erratic. He started pacing the small trailer, muttering to himself, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He slammed doors, kicked furniture, and cursed under his breath. Emily, terrified, retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. She huddled on her bed, clutching her journal to her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear Todd's angry shouts, the sounds of breaking glass, and the thud of his fists against the walls. She tried to block out the noise, to focus on her homework, but it was impossible. She was consumed by fear, by a sense of impending doom. She knew, instinctively, that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, she heard a loud crash, followed by Noah's piercing cries. Her blood ran cold. She jumped up from her bed, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She had to protect Noah. She had to get him out of there. She unlocked her door and crept into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The trailer was in chaos. Furniture was overturned, dishes were shattered, and pictures were hanging crookedly on the walls. Todd was in the living room, his face red with rage, his eyes wild and unfocused. He was holding a broken beer bottle in his hand, his knuckles bleeding. He saw Emily and lunged towards her, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. "You?" he shouted, his voice slurred with alcohol. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can hide from me?" Emily backed away, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't lie to me," Todd roared. "You've been talking. You've been telling lies about me." He raised the broken bottle, his hand shaking. Emily screamed, turning to run, but he grabbed her by the arm, his grip tight and painful. He dragged her towards Noah's crib, his eyes blazing with fury. "You want to protect him," he shouted. "You think you can keep him safe from me?" He reached into the crib, his hand roughly grabbing Noah's small arm. Noah cried out in pain, his face contorted with fear. Emily, seeing her brother in danger, snapped. She forgot her own fear, her own vulnerability. She lunged at Todd, kicking, scratching, biting, anything to make him let go of Noah. She managed to knock the broken bottle from his hand, but he shoved her away, sending her crashing to the floor. She hit her head against the wall, her vision blurring, her ears ringing. She saw Todd looming over her, his fist raised, his face a mask of rage. She closed her eyes, bracing for the blow, her mind screaming for help, for someone, anyone, to save them. This night of terror was the culmination of months of fear and unspoken dread, the moment when Emily's carefully constructed world of denial and self-preservation shattered completely. It was the night she knew she had to escape, to protect her brother, to find a way out of the nightmare that had become their lives. As Todd's fist came down, Emily managed to roll away, narrowly avoiding the full force of the blow. She scrambled to her feet, her head throbbing, her vision blurred, but her determination unwavering. She had to get Noah and get out of there. She grabbed Noah from his crib, ignoring his cries of pain and fear, and ran. She didn't stop to think, didn't plan, didn't consider the consequences. She just ran, her bare feet pounding against the cold, hard floor of the trailer, her lungs burning, her heart racing. She burst out of the trailer and into the night, the cool air stinging her face, the darkness enveloping her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, to find safety, to protect her baby brother. She ran blindly, through the streets of Havenwood, her legs pumping, her arms clutching Noah tightly to her chest. She could hear Todd's angry shouts behind her, his heavy footsteps pounding the pavement, but she didn't dare look back. She ran until she could run no more, her body exhausted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She stumbled, collapsing onto the sidewalk, her knees scraping against the concrete. She looked around, her eyes darting nervously, trying to get her bearings. She was in a part of town she didn't recognize, a maze of dark streets and unfamiliar buildings. She was lost, alone, and terrified. Then she saw it. A beacon of light in the darkness. A sign that read Havenwood General Hospital. Hope surged through her, a flicker of warmth in the cold night. She knew she had to get to the hospital, to find help, to seek medical attention for Noah and herself. She struggled to her feet, her legs trembling, her body aching. She clutched Noah closer, whispering soothing words to him, trying to calm his cries. She started walking, slowly, painfully, towards the hospital, her every step an act of will, an act of defiance, an act of love. She didn't know what awaited her, what the future held, but she knew she had to keep going, for Noah's sake, for her own sake. The hospital seemed miles away, the lights shimmering in the distance, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. She focused on that light, on that hope, using it as a guide, a motivation, a reason to keep moving forward. As she approached the hospital entrance, she saw a group of people standing outside, smoking cigarettes, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of their lighters. She hesitated, fear gripping her heart. What if they didn't believe her? What if they turned her away? What if Todd found her? But she couldn't turn back. She had come too far, risked too much, to give up now. She took a deep breath, steeled her resolve, and walked towards the group, her head held high, her eyes fixed on the entrance to the emergency room. The hospital represented safety, medical care, and potentially, someone who would finally listen. Emily, clutching Noah tightly, burst through the automatic doors of the Havenwood General Hospital emergency room, her appearance a stark contrast to the usual late-night influx of patients. She was barefoot, her clothes torn and dirty, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her hair a tangled mess. Noah, still crying, had visible bruises on his arm and face. The triage nurse, a middle-aged woman named Susan, immediately recognized the signs of distress. She rushed to Emily's side, her voice calm and professional. "Honey, what's wrong? What happened?" Emily, overwhelmed by the events of the night, could only gasp, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. She looked down at Noah, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and terror. Susan gently took Noah from Emily's arms, assessing his condition. She saw the bruises, the fear in his eyes, and the overall neglect. She knew this was more than just a simple accident. This was a case of child abuse. "It's okay, sweetie," Susan said, her voice soothing. "We're going to take care of you both. Just tell me what happened." She led Emily to a small examination room, away from the chaos of the waiting area. She helped her sit down, offering her a glass of water and a blanket. She spoke in a low, calming voice, trying to create a sense of safety and trust. "A doctor, Dr. Miller, we can reuse this name, for consistency," portraying her as a consistently caring presence, arrived, and after a brief examination of both Emily and Noah, confirmed Susan's initial assessment. Noah was bruised and malnourished, but thankfully, had no life-threatening injuries. Emily had a mild concussion, several bruises, and was clearly suffering from severe emotional distress. As Dr. Miller attended to Noah, Susan sat beside Emily, holding her hand, offering silent support. She asked gentle questions, trying to piece together the events that had led to their arrival at the hospital. Emily, initially hesitant, began to speak, her voice trembling, her words fragmented. She described the escalating violence in her home, Todd's anger, her mother's fear, and her own desperate attempt to protect Noah. She struggled to articulate the full extent of the abuse, the fear that had consumed her for so long. She couldn't bring herself to say the words, to describe the specific acts of violence she had witnessed and endured. Then, as Dr. Miller was examining Noah, gently touching his bruised arm, Emily looked at her baby brother, her eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness. She leaned closer to Susan, her voice barely a whisper, and said, "Daddy bruises." The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, a chilling indictment of the abuse that had taken place. Susan felt a wave of emotion wash over her, sadness, anger, and a renewed determination to protect these children. "Daddy?" Susan asked gently, seeking clarification. "Who is Daddy, honey?" Emily pointed a trembling finger towards a picture of a family on a nearby brochure, a father, a mother, and a child. Then she pointed at Noah, and then at herself, her meaning clear. Her stepfather, the man who was supposed to protect them, was the one who had hurt them. Susan immediately contacted the police and Child Protective Services (CPS). She knew that Emily's whispered revelation was a crucial piece of evidence, a breakthrough in a case that would require immediate intervention. The hospital room, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became a haven, a temporary refuge from the storm that raged outside. Emily, exhausted but relieved, finally allowed herself to relax, to feel safe, to know that she had done the right thing. She had spoken her truth, she had protected her brother, and she had taken the first step towards a future free from fear and abuse. The whispered words, "Daddy bruises," were a turning point, a moment of courage that would change their lives forever. Detective Isabella Rossi arrived at the hospital, her expression grim but determined. She had been briefed by Susan, the triage nurse, and had already reviewed the preliminary medical reports on Emily and Noah. She knew this was a serious case, a case that required swift and decisive action. She introduced herself to Emily, speaking in a soft, reassuring voice. She praised her courage, her bravery in coming to the hospital, and her unwavering love for her brother. She assured her that she was safe, that she would be protected, and that she would do everything in her power to bring the perpetrator to justice. Emily, though still traumatized, responded to Detective Rossi's kindness and professionalism. She recounted the events of the night, her voice stronger this time, her memories clearer. She described Todd's rage, his violence, and her desperate flight to the hospital. Detective Rossi listened intently, taking notes, asking clarifying questions, and gathering the information she needed to build a case. She also spoke to Dr. Miller, confirming the extent of Emily and Noah's injuries, and obtaining medical records that would serve as crucial evidence. Meanwhile, other officers had been dispatched to the Carter trailer, tasked with arresting Todd Harper. They found him asleep, reeking of alcohol, his face flushed and swollen. He was initially disoriented and confused, struggling to comprehend what was happening. When the officers informed him of the charges, of Emily's accusations, and of Noah's injuries, he became belligerent and defiant. He denied everything, claiming that Emily was lying, that she was a troubled child who was making up stories to get attention. He insisted that Noah's bruises were the result of accidents, that he had never intentionally harmed the baby. He portrayed himself as a loving stepfather, a victim of false accusations, and a vindictive child. But the officers were not swayed by his denials. They had seen enough cases of child abuse to recognize the signs, to understand the dynamics of fear and manipulation. They placed Todd under arrest, handcuffing him and leading him away from the trailer, his protests echoing through the quiet morning air. The arrest was swift and decisive, a clear indication that the authorities were taking Emily's accusations seriously. But it was also just the beginning of a long and complex legal process, a process that would involve investigations, interviews, court hearings, and ultimately, a trial. As Todd was being taken away, Sarah, Emily's mother, arrived at the trailer, her face pale and stricken. She had received a call from the police, informing her of the arrest and the allegations against her husband. She was initially in denial, refusing to believe that Todd could be capable of such violence. She had witnessed his anger, his controlling behavior, but she had always rationalized it, excused it, convinced herself that it was just his way of showing he cared. But as she saw the police cars, the yellow tape surrounding the trailer, and the grim faces of the officers, the reality of the situation began to sink in. She realized that she had been living a lie, that she had been blind to the abuse that had been taking place right under her nose. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with grief, guilt, and a profound sense of betrayal. She had failed to protect her children, she had failed to recognize the danger, and she had allowed a monster to infiltrate her family. The arrest of Todd Harper was a turning point, a moment of reckoning for everyone involved. It was the beginning of a long and difficult journey towards justice, healing, and a future free from the shadow of abuse. But for now, the focus was on ensuring the safety and well-being of Emily and Noah, the two innocent victims of a violence they should never have experienced. With Todd Harper in custody, Detective Rossi and her team focused on gathering evidence, building a solid case, and unraveling the full extent of the abuse that had taken place within the Carter household. They conducted a thorough search of the trailer, collecting evidence, taking photographs, and documenting the scene. They found evidence of neglect, of a chaotic and insanitary living environment, and of a pervasive atmosphere of fear and intimidation. They also interviewed neighbors, friends, and family members, seeking to establish a pattern of behavior, to identify any witnesses to the abuse, and to understand the dynamics of the Carter family. The interviews revealed a disturbing picture of Todd Harper's character. Neighbors described him as a volatile and controlling man, prone to outbursts of anger, and often seen intoxicated. They spoke of hearing shouts and cries coming from the trailer, of seeing Emily and Noah cowering in fear, and of witnessing Todd's aggressive behavior towards Sarah. Several neighbors admitted that they had suspected something was wrong, but they had been reluctant to intervene, fearing Todd's retaliation and not wanting to get involved in family matters. Their silence, though understandable, had contributed to the ongoing abuse, allowing it to continue unchecked for far too long. The most crucial interview was with Sarah, Emily's mother. Detective Rossi approached the interview with a mixture of compassion and firmness, recognizing that Sarah was both a victim and a potential accomplice. Sarah, initially defensive and evasive, gradually began to open up, her defenses crumbling under the weight of guilt and remorse. She admitted that she had been aware of Todd's abusive behavior, that she had witnessed his violence towards both Emily and Noah, but that she had been too afraid to intervene, too afraid to leave. She described a cycle of abuse, a pattern of escalating violence, threats, and manipulation that had kept her trapped in a relationship with a man she both feared and, in a twisted way, still loved. She spoke of her own vulnerabilities, her own insecurities, and her own dependence on Todd, both financially and emotionally. She confessed that she had lied to protect Todd, that she had dismissed Emily's concerns, that she had rationalized Noah's injuries, that she had actively participated in covering up the abuse. She acknowledged her failure as a mother, her failure to protect her children, and her profound regret for the choices she had made. Detective Rossi, while holding Sarah accountable for her actions, also recognized her as a victim of domestic violence, a woman trapped in a cycle of abuse and manipulation. She offered her support, connecting her with resources for victims of domestic violence and urging her to seek counseling. The investigation also uncovered evidence of Todd's past, revealing a history of violence and aggression. He had been arrested several times for assault and battery, and he had a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. He had a pattern of targeting vulnerable women and children, a pattern of abuse that had gone unchecked for far too long. As the truth unraveled, the full extent of Todd Harper's depravity became clear. He was not just an abusive stepfather, he was a predator, a monster who had preyed on the innocent and the vulnerable. And he would finally be held accountable for his crimes. Following the arrest of Todd Harper, Emily and Noah were placed in the temporary protective custody of Child Protective Services CPS. Ms. Evans, the social worker who had been involved since the hospital visit, worked diligently to find a safe and nurturing environment for the children. Initially, they were placed in an emergency foster home, a temporary placement while a more permanent solution could be found. Emily, traumatized and withdrawn, struggled to adjust to the new surroundings. She missed her mother, despite everything, and she worried constantly about Noah, who was too young to understand what was happening. The foster home, while well-meaning, was not a perfect fit for Emily and Noah. They were surrounded by strangers and familiar routines, and the constant reminder that they were separated from their family. Emily, fiercely protective of her brother, felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and the uncertainty of their situation. Ms. Evans, recognizing Emily's distress and the need for a more stable and supportive environment, began searching for a suitable relative who could provide long-term care. She contacted Emily's maternal grandparents, who lived in a neighboring state. Emily's grandparents, Martha and George Miller, were initially shocked and heartbroken by the news of the abuse and the subsequent removal of their grandchildren. They had been estranged from Sarah for several years due to disagreements and family conflicts, but they had always loved Emily and Noah, and they were eager to help. After a thorough vetting process, which included home visits, background checks, and interviews, CPS approved Martha and George as suitable kinship caregivers. They were granted temporary custody of Emily and Noah, and the children were transported to their new home, a small, cozy farmhouse surrounded by fields and trees. The transition was not easy. Emily, still grappling with the trauma of the abuse and the separation from her mother, was initially withdrawn and distrustful. She missed her familiar surroundings, her friends, and even the chaotic routine of her former life. But Martha and George were patient and understanding. They provided Emily and Noah with a safe, stable, and loving environment. They showered them with affection, listened to their fears, and encouraged them to express their emotions. They created a sense of normalcy, establishing routines, providing healthy meals, and ensuring that the children received the medical and emotional support they needed. Emily gradually began to open up, to trust her grandparents, and to adjust to her new life. She found comfort in the quiet routine of the farm, and the fresh air, the open spaces, and the gentle rhythm of rural life. She started to attend a new school, making new friends, and rediscovering her love of learning. Noah, too, thrived in his new environment. He was a happy, healthy baby, and he quickly bonded with his grandparents, who showered him with love and attention. He began to crawl, to walk, to talk, reaching all the developmental milestones that had been delayed by the neglect and abuse he had suffered. The safe haven provided by Martha and George was a crucial step in Emily and Noah's healing journey. It was a place where they could feel secure, loved, and protected, a place where they could begin to rebuild their lives and to overcome the trauma of their past. It was a testament to the power of family, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring hope for a brighter future. As Emily and Noah settled into their new life with their grandparents, the legal proceedings against Todd Harper moved forward. He remained in jail, awaiting trial, his attempts to secure bail repeatedly denied. Sarah, Emily's mother, faced a difficult and uncertain future. She had been charged with child endangerment and obstruction of justice for her role in covering up the abuse. She had lost custody of her children, her home, and her reputation. She entered a court-ordered rehabilitation program, seeking treatment for her addiction and her mental health issues. She also began attending therapy, grappling with the guilt, the shame, and the profound sense of failure she felt as a mother. The road to recovery was long and arduous. She had to confront her own demons, to acknowledge her complicity in the abuse, and to make amends for the harm she had caused. She also had to earn back the trust of her children, a trust that had been shattered by her actions. She started visiting Emily and Noah regularly, supervised visits at first, then gradually increasing in frequency and duration. The visits were often awkward and emotionally charged, filled with tears, recriminations, and tentative steps towards reconciliation. Emily, while still angry and hurt, gradually began to understand her mother's struggles, her vulnerabilities, and her own victimization at the hands of Todd. She recognized that her mother had been both a victim and a perpetrator, a complex and flawed human being who had made terrible choices but who also, deep down, loved her children. The process of forgiveness was slow and painful, but it was also essential to Emily's healing. She realized that holding onto anger and resentment would only prolong her suffering, that letting go of the past was necessary to move forward with her life. She also focused on her own future, on her education, and on her growing passion for art. She found solace in drawing and painting, expressing her emotions through her artwork, creating a visual language for the trauma she had endured. She excelled in school, earning high grades and gaining the respect of her teachers and peers. She dreamed of becoming an artist, of using her talent to raise awareness about child abuse, to give voice to the voiceless, and to create beauty out of pain. She also remained fiercely protective of Noah, her bond with her brother stronger than ever. She watched him grow, learn, and thrive, and she vowed to be the best big sister she could be, to provide him with the love, support, and guidance he needed to overcome the challenges of his early life. The future was still uncertain, filled with challenges and potential setbacks. But Emily was no longer the frightened, helpless child she had been. She was a survivor, a warrior, a young woman with a voice, a purpose, and a determination to create a better life for herself and her brother. She was facing the future with courage, resilience, and a growing sense of hope. Todd Harper's trial was a media circus, attracting national attention and exposing the dark underbelly of small-town America. The courtroom was packed each day, filled with reporters, community members, and advocates for child protection. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: Emily's testimony, Noah's medical records, the digital evidence recovered from Todd's computer and phone, the testimony of neighbors and family members, and Sarah's own damning account of the abuse. Todd, represented by a court-appointed attorney, maintained his innocence, claiming that Emily was lying, that she was a troubled child who had fabricated the story to get attention. His defense was weak and unconvincing, riddled with inconsistencies and contradicted by the overwhelming evidence. The trial lasted for several weeks, a grueling ordeal for everyone involved. Emily, despite her fear and anxiety, testified with courage and dignity, her voice clear and unwavering, her words painting a chilling picture of the abuse she and Noah had endured. The jury, after deliberating for less than a day, returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. Todd Harper was convicted of multiple charges of child sexual assault, child endangerment, and assault and battery. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict was a victory for Emily and Noah, a validation of their suffering, and a testament to the power of truth and justice. But it was also a somber moment, a reminder of the irreparable harm that had been done, and the long road to recovery that still lay ahead. Sarah, having cooperated fully with the prosecution and demonstrated a genuine commitment to her recovery, received a reduced sentence for her role in enabling the abuse. She was sentenced to probation and mandatory counseling, with the possibility of regaining limited, supervised visitation with Noah in the future. Her relationship with Emily, however, remained fractured, a testament to the deep wounds that would take years to heal. Emily and Noah continued to thrive in the care of their grandparents, Martha and George. They provided a stable, loving, and nurturing environment, a safe haven where the children could begin to heal and rebuild their lives. Emily, with the ongoing support of Dr. Chen and a growing network of friends and advocates, continued her therapy, working through the trauma, learning to trust again, and gradually regaining her sense of self-worth. She excelled in school, her artistic talent blossoming, her voice growing stronger and more confident. She also became an advocate for child abuse prevention, sharing her story with other young people, raising awareness, and inspiring others to speak out against injustice. She found purpose in her pain, transforming her trauma into a source of strength and a catalyst for change. Noah, growing up in a loving and supportive environment, showed no lasting effects of the early abuse he had endured. He was a happy, healthy, and well-adjusted child, surrounded by love and protected by a family determined to shield him from the darkness of the past. The years passed, and the scars of the past, though still present, began to fade. Emily and Noah built a new life, a life filled with hope, healing, and a growing sense of normalcy. They had overcome unimaginable adversity, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live their lives to the fullest.